makers. Hopefully you're having a good start to the week. I'm going to be sharing a few perspectives about the books from this past week of Maker Study Hall. Those books were Black Girl Call Home by Jasmine, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, and The 5 A.M. Club by Sharma. The book, Black Girl Call Home, is a collection of poems. The majority of the poems are in relation to women and their community, as well as various connections that they build throughout their lives, including with aunts, mothers, daughters, and different aspects of womanhood, as well as with brothers, fathers, and sons. There's aspects of how violence manifests within the community, such as in the poem, I Know You Didn't Mean to Kill Him, an excerpt, as well as use of power to get what somebody wants, and just the scars that leaves in a community. There are aspects of loss covered throughout, as in the collection of poems that start with Whitney, and just what the role model meant to the community, and what her loss meant to the broader community as well, given that she's a performer. There's also poems around body autonomy, just what the control of one's own destiny looks like individually, as well as over longer spans of time within institutions. There's also a lot about how the various emotions within a community relate to love, as well as permutations of intense feelings and the opposite, which is like the absence of feelings, as the book explores, or the poems explore. I think the poem My Sister's Keeper is interesting. There's a popular saying, my brother's keeper, and just how the analog to that, my sister's keeper, is explored by the author, adds another perspective or another layer to the larger phrase or the popular phrase. poem has a lot of descriptive elements, and I think the structure of the poems has a unique kind of flow. There's a lot of coverage around emotions in the broader community that are forced upon the people within the community, as well as those that manifest organically within. There's also the topic of Black exceptionalism and how it relates to people within a public spotlight. I think the collection of poems around Kanye explores this, and just the lines that he and others like him that are public creators and artists, the kinds of divides that they tread. I think by using a lot of the famous or more well-known persons within the Black community especially, there's a kind of universality to the lessons drawn or to the situations that are painted throughout the poems within the book. I think the coverage of protests and violence against the Black community through bombings and other acts of overt violence are also very poignant, especially as such incidents get more coverage in recent weeks and months. And incidents from civil rights and other periods in American and global history in which communities are fighting for representation are also woven in to the poems and covered throughout the book. And there's also aspects of not necessarily self-loathing, but a kind of self-discovery as the author and those throughout her community, or not necessarily the author, but the characters portrayed throughout the poems as they wrestle and come to terms with certain modes of being, individually, interpersonally, and on a broader scale. There's also multiple cities and locations covered throughout the poem, or the poems in the book, that show the breadth and the various areas that Black people call home, and just what those communities look like, and the various kinds of problems that affect each community that are shared across the broader community, which kind of creates a sense of cohesion and the problems being worked through. a lot of layers to the poems in the book, and a lot to be learned and felt throughout the text as well. That was Black Girl Call Home by Jasmine. Another book from this past week was called An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. It's a story about aliens, basically. I think the structure is somewhat linear, but to an extent logarithmic in terms of how the story develops and just the scale of the situation being worked through. It's not necessarily explicitly a story about aliens, but it's about something unknown and superhuman in a sense, which is often ascribed to being about aliens. I think the way the author develops the storyline is also similar to leaving breadcrumbs along a trail, and it's leading to a large reveal later on, but there's multiple trails being placed and followed throughout the narrative in terms of how the happenings are revealed. The story reminds me somewhat of the movie Annihilation. Yet the kinds of superhuman beings that are discussed throughout have a different form and mode of interaction compared to that film, which is also a book. Or probably a book which is also a film. I think there's aspects of humanity that are reflected in the superhuman civilization. They seem somewhat of like a continuation of humanity. I think later in the book around how humans connect globally, not to spoil the novel, but just effectively how humans connect on a global and broader scale and the level of integration across the planet and how the superhuman beings communicate. I think how it covers stardom is also interesting in terms of just what happens to the main group and how their lives change. That is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. And the third book from this past week is called The 5 a.m. Club. The book is more of a narrative structure rather than like a lecture. There are mounds of tools and approaches discussed in the book, and the narrative style aids in showing what application can look like. I think the rules of the 5 a.m. club, things like the 5-3-1 creed, the triple 20 method or 20-20-20 method, and various other tools that are detailed throughout the book and shown, implemented by the characters within the book are also useful in a broader sense in terms of just how these kinds of actions and daily practices can be beneficial to most people, and what it can do in terms of granting a level of control and self-determination to a person's path. I think also how they travel to different destinations and the topics that they cover also sections the various topics that they cover in each of the sessions in a certain way. It's kind of like having chapters of a book spread out across the globe or across a community or possibly within a specific building. So if you had like a building and each room was set up to be a chapter of a book, could be an interesting way to go about disseminating knowledge. There's also a lot of references to people throughout history, including philosophers, authors, civil rights, advocates and community builders. As well as broader leaders and artists that help to construct a broader scale of how the lessons within the book manifest in application as shown by the people referenced. I think there's a lot that can be gained from this text. And hopefully if you got to read it, you gained a lot from it as well. Those are some thoughts on this past week's Maker Study Hall books, which were Black Girl Call Home by Jasmine, an absolutely remarkable thing by Hank Green, and The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. It'd be great to see any dream marks you make from the the readings you got to enjoy this past week. If you have any recommendations for additional books for upcoming Maker Study Halls, you could leave those in the comments or share them in a direct message. And the books for upcoming Maker Study Halls will be, or for this week's Maker Study Hall, will be on the NONC Facebook page, and you can send a direct message if you have any questions, suggestions, or requests for upcoming books or Maker Study Hall sessions. Have a great day, everybody.